There are so many things that are on my mind at any single point of time. But I think the biggest thing that's on my mind at the moment is how do we understand ourselves better? And that's the work that we need to do. And when I talk about ourselves better, I'm talking about the settings that we work in. Often we understand our environments, but we don't make an investment in our resources, in our human resources. And organisations need to start taking a deep dive, because if they do that, they'll begin to identify not so much the gaps, but the opportunities that lie within the resources, the human resources of an organisation. And I think by doing that, then they can go, okay, what are the strategies that we can start to create to ensure that we're becoming more reflective of the community that we're serving? If we can do that, what are the strategies we can take if we want to expand? How can we start to notice those opportunities as a way of being able to foster growth for our organisation? Not only growth, but even greater inclusion, and also finding ways how we can create more equitable settings. If you don't do that, you risk becoming redundant. There's great risk to organisations, and there are a myriad of organisations out there that we know that haven't been adapting to their environments. They haven't been taking advantage to the full extent of what they have. And when you do that, when you know your greatest resource are your human beings that work for you. So it's about understanding them better. If you can understand them better, then you can take those decisive strategies as a way of being able to become more inclusive, more representative, and more equitable. But it all comes back to data at the end of the day. You need to take a data-driven approach to DEI work. We don't understand diversity in its entirety. And diversity simply means one thing. People can write books and books about it, but it just means difference. So it's about understanding that difference. And the data approach that we take to this measurement approach that we take to diversity, equity and inclusion, is understanding the key metrics to diversity. There are 3 key metrics. There's variety, there's balance, and there's this other metric of disparity. And I might just take a moment to speak to each of those. Variety basically means the absence of homogeneity. So you might have in one group, let's say you might have in one group 2 Italian and 2 French people. And in another group you have 1 Italian, 1 French, 1 Spanish and 1 Portuguese person. You have a greater variety of languages or cultures in that second group. Balance is looking at the distribution of what we're trying to measure across an organisation. And this is extremely important. Why? Because a lot of organisations say they might be diverse, but the further north you go into an organisation, or you might go into certain areas of an organisation, and what do you find? Almost no diversity. Okay. And we see that with a lot of boards. And in Australia and in the US, the further north you go, boards often become more male-dominated and they're whiter, to put it bluntly. And they're not reflective of their communities. Organisations, the communities in particular that those organisations are serving, those communities need to see themselves in these organisations. And if they don't, well, resentment builds. And there are a myriad of studies out there that tell us this. If you're not representative of the community you're serving, then you're essentially failing. And if you're failing, you're going to create tension. This comes back to one of those principles of thermodynamics, which is known as the law of requisite variety, which states that any system, if it's not as equally as varied as the environment it's operating in, will eventually disappear. This is science. So we are taking a scientific approach. I think the last metric, which I haven't talked about, after variety and balance, is disparity. Disparity is looking at the dissimilarity of what we're trying to measure. So you remember that second group that I talked about? The Portuguese, the Italian, the French and the Spanish-speaking people in one group. Think of another group now, which has got a Spanish, Arabic-speaking person, Japanese, and maybe a Swahili-speaking person. the diversity there is greater. Why? Because we know that someone's ethno-linguistic background shapes cognitive processes, influences the way one sees the world, influences behaviours, shapes social norms, and a whole range of other behavioural factors. So I think it's extremely important that we understand these metrics. So what we're talking about here is how do we now take this anthropological approach to understanding our settings, and how can we use that to an advantage? Now you might say, oh, but diversity, if you've got too much diversity, how do you manage that? It requires effort. That goes by without being said. If you don't make an effort, then that diversity can turn on you. If you do make an effort, then that diversity can be an incredible force for transformation. Hence the slogan which I developed in 2013, diversified we grow. I wasn't thinking about just creating these socially cohesive and peaceful communities. I was thinking about how when you bring diverse perspectives together, what you're creating is this diversification of ideas, which is knowledge, because that's what knowledge is, the diversification of many different ideas coming together to create something new. So what we're saying here is that the premise of innovation in many ways is the intercultural exchange of dialogue and ideas. Therefore, having the competency today of being able to relate to the other is more important than ever. Let's go back to 1989. 1989 was a monumental year for a range of different reasons. It was the year that the idea of intersectional analysis or intersectionality had come into the world. It was the year that the Berlin Wall was brought down. And I just happened to be in Berlin a few weeks later. And I remember that occasion. People said, wow, this is going to be an amazing period in history because it's going to bring down all these barriers, not just in one part of the world, but all over the world. But that same year, we also had Tim Berners-Lee, who gave us something, who gave us this ubiquitous device that we're all using today, called the World Wide Web. And that's created what we call this super diverse world, this super connected world, where time and space have been compressed. And within a 3-decade period, we experience massive economic globalization without globalization of values and ethics. We've experienced massive economic globalization without globalization of values and ethics. And because we've become super connected, because we're communicating with people all over the world, it's important that we have a global classification of how we understand humanity. And that's the work that we're doing in our organisation, Cultural Infusion. We've developed Diversity Atlas. And Diversity Atlas provides this data equity transformational model which ensures that no one is left out. We are not about otherizing. We are not about putting people in a too hard basket. We want to make sure that every single person counts. We want to make sure that every single person is included. And to date, there is no system out there that allows us to do that. There is no system that allows us to be able to capture comprehensive insights, not only into the extent and type of cultural dimensions within an organisation, but a whole range of other demographic dimensions. And that's what we do with Diversity Atlas. We want to make sure that everyone counts, that everyone is part of that conversation. And we also recognise that not everyone starts from the same place. Not everyone is starting from the same place, not only socially, but culturally. So how do we start to have these conversations, unpack what we have in front of us to ensure that everyone is able to participate? Thank you.